3 months before her father called her uneducated trash and pointed at the door she had quietly paid for her mother's surgery. 3 months before her brother laughed at her dropout status across the dinner table, she had wired the funds that closed his house purchase. 3 months before her sister told her she was embarrassing the family. She had rescued that sister's wedding from financial collapse. None of them knew. She made sure of that. And then she walked into that birthday dinner carrying a retirement account package for parents who had spent 30 years treating her like the cautionary tale, and discovered that some people cannot be helped into respect. She picked up her purse, said 2 words, and walked out. What the family did next would cost every single one of them. This isn't a story about money or degrees. It's about what it costs a person to keep choosing people who've already decided who you are, and what it looks like when the bill finally comes. Her name is not important. What she built is. She grew up in a house where success had a dress code. Her father, a mechanical engineer at the same firm for 35 years, treated his consistency like a character reference. Her mother taught English and enforced the same rules with softer language. Her brother followed the expected path with the discipline of someone who'd never questioned whether the path was right. Her sister mastered the art of saying the correct thing in every room. And then there was her, the one who made everyone uncomfortable by wanting something different. At 13, she was teaching local makers how to photograph products for online listings. At 16, she was building checkout systems for women selling candles and handmade soaps out of county fair booths. She understood something early that her business school professors would spend entire semesters theorizing. People don't buy products. They buy the feeling a story wraps around a product. Her father called it a hobby with better lighting. He said cleverness without credentials was decoration, not architecture. Have you ever had someone call your real work a cute little side project and then quietly accept money from it later? She enrolled in college because fighting felt more exhausting than disappointing herself. She lasted 3 semesters. Every lecture described business through glass while she was already bleeding on the other side. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't lost. She was running a different race on a different track, and nobody in that house could see the track. The day she told her father she was leaving school, he looked at her the way a judge looks at someone who has wasted the court's time. Cleverness without credentials is just a hobby with better lighting. He said no one with serious money or serious responsibility would ever trust a dropout. She left anyway. She rented an apartment over a laundromat, worked until her wrists hurt, and learned every brutal thing the classroom refused to teach: chargebacks, ad fatigue, client panic at 2 a.m., the physics of keeping payroll when the margins disappear. What she built next was the thing her father would eventually have to watch his own company celebrate. Here's what nobody tells you about building something real. The hardest part isn't the market. It's the people who raised you. By her late 20s, she had built a commerce and logistics company that helped small American home goods makers, textile artists, ceramic studios, woodworkers, specialty food brands build direct-to-consumer businesses without getting swallowed by giant marketplaces. She handled the systems, set the brand standards, negotiated the wholesale relationships, and eventually built software tools specifically for her own sellers. She wasn't reselling trinkets online. She was running an ecosystem. 41 employees, national distribution partners, 2 buyout offers turned down because she wanted control more than headlines. By 32, her personal stake had crossed $31 million. The silence she kept about those numbers wasn't modesty. It was something uglier. Some part of her still wanted them to choose her before her success made her undeniable. Have you ever kept yourself smaller in a room than you needed to be, hoping someone would finally see the full version of you without being forced to? She kept showing up that way, small, careful, quiet about the numbers, and the help kept moving in one direction. There is a version of this story where her silence was love. There's another version where it was enabling. She would eventually have to decide which one had been true. She had paid for her mother's surgery through a trust account structured so the hospital billing department never said her name out loud. When her brother came up short closing on a house, funds appeared through a chain of intermediaries long enough that he couldn't trace it back. When her sister's wedding nearly collapsed after vendor costs spiked 2 weeks before the date, the shortfall resolved before the caterer canceled. Her father once stood in that same kitchen and declared himself the backbone of the family. He was, at that moment, unknowingly driving a vehicle she had paid to repair. She thought if she showed them what she'd quietly built calmly without theatrics, something would finally change. She was wrong about what would change. She carried the gift to that birthday dinner with more hope than she'd allowed herself in years. A fully funded retirement account structured through her financial team. Not flashy, not revenge, just proof that she had been thinking about them the whole time she'd been building. She set the envelope beside her father's plate after dessert and said she wanted to share something. He frowned at the figures. Ryan laughed first, that specific laugh people use when they want to perform skepticism for an audience. He asked if this was one of those internet-rich situations where people brag about paper value and leased cars. Her sister said, "Please don't make Dad's birthday about your brand." And then her father looked at the documents like they personally offended him, and asked in a voice thin with disgust whether she thought throwing money around made her equal to people who had done life the right way. She said it wasn't about equality. It was about care. She said she'd been helping for years without wanting anyone to feel exposed. That was when everything broke open. She told them about the surgery, the house, the wedding, not to shame them, but because she was tired of being the family's best-kept secret. Her father stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. He didn't look grateful. He looked cornered. And in that moment she understood something she'd been refusing to see. Some people would rather call you cruel than admit they've needed you. Ryan said she'd made him a charity case. Her sister said she was manipulative for helping in secret. Her mother cried and kept asking why she would do all of that without saying anything, as though the answer hadn't been sitting at the head of the table her entire life. And her father pointed at the door. "You are still uneducated trash with good timing." Then louder, "Get out of my house, you lowlife. Don't come back here acting like money makes you one of us." One of us. As if she'd ever truly been allowed to be. What do you do when the family that needed you most is the same one that just told you to leave? She picked up her purse. Her hands were perfectly steady. She looked at each face, her mother staring at the table, her sister silent with shame, her brother wearing an expression she can only describe as relief, and said 2 words. "Okay, fine." She sat in her car for 2 minutes without starting it. She didn't cry, she just felt something go cold and clean inside her. Not broken. Finished, by sunrise, she had packed her life into boxes. She deleted the group chat. She left her house key on the kitchen counter. By morning, she was driving to Charleston. She didn't send a letter. She didn't explain. 3 weeks later, her silence would answer every question they'd been too proud to ask. Charleston didn't heal her overnight. It gave her room to stop performing. She stripped the cottage of everything generic and filled it with handmade pieces from people who built things instead of arguments. She adopted a rescue dog named June. She started sleeping through the night. She opened a studio downtown and hosted workshops for makers and women building outside the usual gate-kept paths. The first was supposed to hold 12 people. 47 came, some for strategy, some because they had been told they were unrealistic so many times they no longer trusted their own instincts. She understood every face in that room. Then her brother showed up at her front door on a humid Saturday. The expression he wore was the same one he always wore when he thought charm could be converted into leverage. He hadn't come to apologize. He needed a bridge loan. She asked whether he had driven 11 hours to say sorry or to collect. He didn't like that. He started talking about blood and loyalty, the words people use when they want access without accountability. Before she could answer, her phone rang. Her CFO, on speaker. She didn't lower her voice, didn't send it to voicemail, didn't perform modesty for the first time in her life. He heard her confirm terms on a 7-figure licensing agreement and approve the first stage of a multi-state expansion. When the call ended, he was staring at her like he'd just met a stranger wearing his face. She told him no, not no for now. No loans, no emergency rescues, no more private funding for people who publicly degraded her and privately counted on her silence. He said her father had been right about her all along, that success had made her selfish. Success didn't change me, it just made it impossible to keep pretending I owed you everything while deserving nothing. He left. He drove straight back to Indianapolis and told everyone what he'd heard. The house. The deal. The money. That conversation was the first crack in the myth they'd built about her. There is a moment, and you may have lived it, when the people who underestimated you finally see the full picture. That moment doesn't feel like victory. It feels like grief for all the years you spent making yourself smaller, hoping recognition would come from the inside before it had to arrive from the outside. The cruelest thing isn't being dismissed. It's the realization that you were complicit in your own dismissal, out of love, out of hope, out of a loyalty that was never matched. A regional business journal featured her story. The piece described how the most innovative founders are often dismissed earliest, not by strangers, but by the people who watched them grow up. It traveled faster than she expected. And then it circled back to Indianapolis in a way nobody in that family could control or explain away. Her father's engineering colleagues started asking questions, half joking at first, then not joking at all. Men who had sat across conference tables from him for decades, who had listened to him lecture about discipline and credentials and the right way to build a life, they were forwarding the article with comments he couldn't respond to. The firm's younger leadership saw it too. They didn't ask his opinion. They reached out to her directly. They invited her to give the keynote at their regional summit on manufacturing innovation. The title they proposed made her laugh in her kitchen. Success beyond the credential. Her father would not only hear about it, he would have to sit in the audience and watch the company he had given 35 years of his life celebrate the exact kind of daughter he had thrown out of his house. When she walked onto that stage and saw him in the front section, shoulders squared too hard, face caught between shame and stubbornness, she understood something about power she hadn't quite grasped before. She told the room that talent doesn't always arrive carrying the paperwork we expect. She told them that some of the most capable people in the country are dismissed early because they don't fit a script written by fear. She said credentials matter, training matters, discipline matters, but none of those things mean anything if they become excuses to deny dignity to someone whose path looks different. Then she said the line that stopped the room. A person's value is revealed long before their resume impresses you. She didn't look at her father when she said it. She didn't need to. The silence around him answered for her. The room stood. Not because she had won. Because truth, when it finally speaks without apology, changes the temperature of a room. It has physical weight. After the keynote, the director who'd invited her approached her father with the specific politeness of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and said, "You must be incredibly proud." What her father said next in a side corridor, away from the crowd, was the first honest sentence he had ever said to her. And it wasn't what she expected. He started the way people always start when they're late. "I was under pressure. I didn't know how to react. I was shocked." Then he stopped, because even he could hear how small that sounded after everything. Finally, he said it. "I was cruel, because your success made me feel unnecessary. It was not redemptive. It was not enough to erase anything." But it was the first honest thing he had ever given her, and it arrived in front of the people he'd spent years performing certainty for. What came next wasn't forgiveness. It was something harder. She listened to all of them, and what she heard dismantled the version of her family she had spent years protecting in her own mind. Her mother admitted she had spent her whole life making peace with strong men by sacrificing inconvenient truth, and that it had cost her a daughter. Not in the abstract. Specifically, measurably, in years. Her brother admitted he had built half his identity around feeling superior to her, and when that collapsed, he tried to borrow her success the way he had borrowed everything else. Her sister apologized in front of all of them, not the half apology buried under excuses she'd sent as a voice note weeks earlier, but the real version. The kind that costs the person giving it something they don't get back. She believed parts of them. She did not give any of them absolution. What do you owe people who finally tell the truth after years of choosing not to? She told them the answer with the only currency that still meant anything: clarity. No more private funding, no more emotional rewriting after the fact. No more performing smallness to protect someone else's pride. If they wanted any version of her going forward, it would be the real one, the one who had boundaries, who kept her distance, who no longer needed their approval to feel like enough. Her sister had shown real accountability. That earned a phone call. Her mother had admitted real cost. That earned a text. Her brother had a long road ahead before she'd consider anything beyond basic civility, and her father could speak to her, but he would do it without authority, without entitlement, and without expecting her to ease the guilt that was entirely his to carry. He nodded like a man learning a language too late to sound natural in it. What would you have said, standing in that corridor, with the whole room still applauding on the other side of the wall? She flew home to Charleston the next morning. Home. That word finally meant something. She had chosen not a room where she had been evaluated. There are people who will hear this story and call her cold. They'll say family is family. They'll say forgiveness is the real victory. Those people have never spent a decade quietly funding the people who publicly humiliated them. Forgiveness is not an obligation. Accountability is. And those are not the same thing. She kept hosting workshops. The scholarship program she had started quietly expanded. June slept by the door while she taught pricing, founder psychology, and why shame is one of the most expensive things a person can carry into a business or into a family. One evening, she stood on the back steps of her cottage, watching the tide pull darkness across the water. She thought about the woman who had walked out of that birthday dinner saying, "Okay, fine." She used to think revenge meant making people suffer the way they made you suffer. She knows better now. The real revenge wasn't the keynote. It wasn't the standing ovation, or the article, or watching her father's certainty finally run out of places to hide. The real revenge was building a life so solid that their approval became a thing she once needed and no longer does. If this story landed somewhere in your chest, if you've ever been told your work wasn't serious, your path wasn't real, your choices were something to be managed hit-like on this video, not for the algorithm. Because that click is you saying, "I've been in that room too. And I chose myself anyway." Subscribe to When Family Revenge Strikes, not because we post stories, but because some truths only make sense when someone else has already lived them first. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been called a failure by the exact people who were surviving on your strength? I read every one. The people who needed you to stay small will never forgive you for growing anyway.